Hey folks, my name's Ed Travers. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm an Anglican priest in the beautiful parish of St. Margaret of Scotland that sits on the ancestral and on the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Go away. A friend sent me a video, a YouTube video, a link. The video was a conversation between a couple of Anglicans. Now, these are not members of the Anglican Church of Canada or the Episcopal Church of the United States, but rather members of something known as the Anglican Church of North America. They're a group of guys. I guess they do have some women clergy, but not women bishops. That's beyond the pale. They are a group of people who decided that the Episcopal Church and the Anglican Church of Canada were going just too far left, and they took their ball and went home. They started their own thing. They decided to do their own thing where they were going to be true, whatever that means, to, well, you know what, true to their theology. They're not in full communion with the Anglican Church of the world. Anyhow, I think I'm saying that so that I don't have to defend myself as an Anglican. The video, they spend a couple of minutes. They spend a couple of minutes engaged in something that we're beginning to see now out there in the world, a form of denialism when it comes to the atrocities that took place at the residential schools here in Canada, for sure. These guys were Americans speaking about what they were hearing in the news here in Canada, what they heard in the news last year when the bodies of those when those bodies were found in Kamloops, BC, and when those bodies were found in Cowessess, Saskatchewan. And they're asking questions. They're asking cynical questions. They're asking, why? They're asking questions that would move people to believe that the atrocities that took place at the residential schools, well, they didn't really happen, or they weren't really as bad as people are saying. If all we had to go on were the ground-penetrating radar surveys that have been done that have said, hey, we found a spot in Kamloops where we believe there are hundreds of people buried at a former residential school. And we found a spot at a former residential school in Cowessess where we believe hundreds of people have been buried. And we believe that we found a spot at this school, and that school, and this school, and that school where we think people have been buried. If that's all we had to go on, their questions may actually carry water. They may actually be good questions. There's nothing wrong with being a little bit cynical. There's nothing wrong with an investigation, with being thorough. The issue, and I do take incredible issue with this, is that they did not do the necessary research before they opened their mouths. They did not do the necessary research before they began asking these, what are actually ignorant questions. They ask questions like, well, if we found a mass grave, so let's just touch on that one first. It's not a mass grave. A mass grave means something different. These were unmarked graves. Graves of people who were in the custody of the residential schools, who died from tuberculosis, because everybody at a residential school seemed to die from tuberculosis, and yes, I'm being facetious. Unmarked graves of people, children, Indigenous people and children who died while in the custody of a residential school, who were given a proper Christian burial. That's what we're finding in Kamloops and Cowessess, and that's what the people are looking for all around the country with these surveys. So if we're finding these mass graves, their word, not mine, why aren't the RCMP being brought in? Well, the first thing we need to understand is that these graves are not part of an investigation into whether or not atrocities took place. That ship has sailed. All right, that train has left the building. We're beyond that. Now, I don't remember what year it started, but here in Canada, we had something called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that was put together. And it was given the authority to investigate the history of residential schools, what took place, where did they come from, why were they put into existence, who participated in them, all the questions you can imagine when you would search through the history of an organization. And they spent countless hours. They interviewed thousands of people, survivors of residential schools, the children of survivors of residential schools, to figure out what took place in these places. And if that was all, then people will say this and people will say that, but it wasn't. These residential schools were incredibly well documented. The Canadian government had thousands of pages of documentation saying what they were about, why they were there, including some of the most horrendously racist things you've ever heard. One of the things that I read yesterday while researching for this video, so that I didn't go ahead and open my mouth and sound like a bloody fool, was there was a saying back in the late 1800s, kill the Indian to save the man. Right? The point of these schools was about eliminating the indigenous culture. We're going to teach the Indian out of the children. We're going to remove the culture from them. Remove them from the culture. So, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 2015 released the Truth and Reconciliation Report, which had not only was a detailed, thorough summary of everything that they had discovered. Within it, they also gave almost 100 recommendations as to how we as a country can move forward to help begin the healing process for our Indigenous brothers and sisters and communities. In those recommendations, and I believe it was number 72, the recommendation was to begin a death registry, to begin to try to figure out not only how many people died in these schools, but who. Families and communities still wanted to know what happened to their brothers and to their sisters, to their aunts and their uncles. They still wanted to know what happened to the generations that came before them. They don't just want a number, they want to know where those people went. So number 72 said, let's start a death registry about who's all there now. The number right now in Canada stands, the last number that I saw, a little over 4,000 people are confirmed and recorded to have died in residential schools. And they've really only just begun this process. These surveys. Again, they're not being done as part of an investigation as to whether or not the atrocities happened. The atrocities happened. We know they happened. The Truth and Reconciliation Report was delivered, acknowledged, received, and accepted. We know our part in it. So this denialism, these questions, these cynical questions, without the Truth and Reconciliation Report, may actually seem somewhat valid. They're not valid. If you encounter this argument, if you encounter this denialism when it comes to the residential schools of Canada, nobody's making this up. Nobody's doing this for the money. Nobody's doing this as a way of gaining public sympathy. These surveys are taking place not in the hopes of being able to prove that an atrocity took place. These surveys are being conducted. These surveys are taking place because atrocities happened. These surveys are taking place because there are still people in my country, in Canada, who want to know what happened to their brothers and their sisters, to their aunts and to their uncles, to the people of their community. They want an answer. These surveys are being done. These grave sites are being searched for. And thankfully, being found in order to help people begin to heal. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord keep you. May the Lord's face be made to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord's countenance be lifted up to you. May you always know the peace of being in the Lord's presence. And I pray that our hearts and our ears and our eyes will always be open to the experience of others. That we would always be willing to accept our role in what's taken place in somebody else's lives. Because here in Canada, it was blind eyes and deaf ears that allowed these residential schools to operate the way they did. It was a cold heart, cold hearts that thought they were a good idea. It was arrogance and ignorance that thought we were helping somebody. Amen. Nemultus.